Thank you so much. It's so long since I was described as an actress, and it brought back so many memories. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As already stated, my name is Juliet Asante. I'm the CEO of the Film Authority of Ghana, and it's an authority that was set up barely 3 years ago. And I'd love to delve into the meat of what we are doing, but I just want to take a step back before I start and plug into some of the numbers that were mentioned. First of all, it is interesting that the creative space is part of the conversation today, because for a very long time when we were talking about opportunities for creating wealth and growth and all of those things, and in fact speaking the business language, the creative space wasn't very counted. And there are many reasons for that, but that's an anomaly that hopefully with time we are changing. And for us, the critical reasons we have to change that very quickly, and then now I will jump into some of the numbers, because in just 7 years, Africa will have 40% global youth population. Now, this is happening whilst the rest of the world is aging. That means that in just a few years, if you meet, even now, if you meet like 3 or 4 people in the world, it's very likely, or if you meet 10 people in the world, it's very likely that 4 of them will come from Africa. And then by 2050, those numbers will triple. And so if you look at those numbers, the fact that the world is going to have, Africa is going to have 40% of the global youth population. And then you look at the fact that also in just a few years, the population on the continent will be bigger than, some say Asia and wherever combined, India, China and India combined. Then the question becomes, with so many young people, how do we create jobs? How do we create wealth? Because, to be young is a positive. We can do so much with it. And if you listen to what many of the speakers said, many of these industries, rely on young population. However, if you have a young population that isn't employed, that also becomes a problem. And yet, the UNESCO report, going back to data and the relevance of data, the UNESCO released a report in 2021, and that has made so much difference in the space of conversation. The creative space, and I always like to say led by film, and the reason why I say that is because I myself, of course, I'm a film practitioner. But at the same time, beyond being a film practitioner, film carries along most of the other creative space, be it costuming, makeup, design, whichever way you speak. Film usually encompasses that. And so I like to lead with film. According to the UNESCO report, the creative space is the largest employer on the continent. And so if you look at the numbers and then you look at the creative space being the largest employer, and even then, as we sit now, the sector, again led by film, attracts 5 billion into Africa and employs 5 million. But the potential is actually 20. So we have a potential to create 20 billion jobs and create 20 million jobs. The question that may follow after that is, what is the role of Africa, or what's the share of Ghana in those numbers? And so if you look at the fact that we need to create so many jobs, and this sector already creates the largest jobs opportunities on the continent, then it's almost a no-brainer that one will ask, why are we not focusing on the creative sector so much? Also, barrier to entry is low. Extremely low. And in fact, during the pandemic, this was one of the most resilient sectors globally. And so after the pandemic, a lot of economies are looking to the creative space to revamp their economies. Are we doing that? In fact, in the US, average income during the pandemic in the sector was higher than all incomes by over 45%. That tells you the resilience. And this was even more than the oil and gas and communications sector. Our neighbors right here, if you take Nigeria, now in Nigeria, the creative space again, but this time even more narrowly focused on film, is the third largest employer following oil, I think after oil and something, but it's the third largest employer in Nigeria. And so the creative space really, if you look at all the dynamics that characterize it. Thank you. I want to see if this is working. Yes, it is. So now that I've given you some of the numbers, I'm going to delve into the meat of my presentation. Now, I gave those numbers just to frame what I'm going to say, but in the actual conversation, I might move away from that a bit because data is critical, but we are here to talk about wealth creation and why the creative space is critical to wealth creation. Now, when I mentioned 40% of the global youth population will come from Africa, this is, if you ask me, this is how the face of Africa in a few years. You would have 70% youth population. In fact, in Ghana now, the median age is around 21. And in many African countries, it's between 18 and 22. And so one can say that the majority of people are either young people or female. Females also make 50% of our populations. Now, I make the comment that the future is bright for one reason, and I've already stated that because obviously if you have a lot of young people and you put them to work, then the future is bright. Now, again, moving into some numbers that may also be interesting to you, is that by the end of the century, Africa will be the only continent experiencing population growth. Now, you can give the reasons to so many factors, but that notwithstanding, let's just stay with that fact. It is projected that every 4 people you meet on the planet is from Africa. 13 of the world's biggest urban areas will be in Africa. African cities outpace the rest of the world's cities in growth. Now, someone may look at all this as problems, but we see this as opportunity because obviously with that kind of population, you know, now we talk about AI and all that. Other countries may really be needing that to fill in their workforce. But in Africa, in as much as we need AI and everything that it brings, including the very great things, we really need to put our hands to work. And so even as we jump into the AI conversation and AI adaptation, we need to be cautious how this doesn't exclude our young people from getting jobs. You can see the numbers there as well. Now, you can also delve slightly into unemployment rates. I was reading that Ghana's unemployment rate now is just between 3 and 4%. We are doing very well. But then if you compare it to the sub-region, you're looking at an average of 30%. So Ghana is relatively doing well, but again, still unemployment rates are quite high, especially if you look at the fact that it centers mostly on young people. I've said this already. Now, even though I've mentioned all of this, I want to delve deep into what, for me, I see as the drivers of wealth, because we can mention all the numbers and talk about all the spaces we can fill and all that, but what are the key drivers of wealth? And for me, the key drivers of wealth, and again, where film is so critical, is mindset. Everything we've spoken about here, I think, can be linked to mindsets. And so in as much as we talk the wealth conversation, what are those things that we are doing that are changing the mindsets? Usually what worries me is that most of our conversations scratch the surface. We never sink down to go into what are the images we are seeing. And so if you talk about all of the things, be it agric, even if you talk about the fact that maybe agric is not so attractive to young people, perhaps it's the images that we have seen of agric that we don't find so attractive. Now, many countries have developed themselves not because they had resources, natural resources, but because they had human resources or have developed and focused, talking about focus, have focused on their human resource. If you're focusing on human resource, then of course, I mean, you can take the case of Singapore, you can even take the case of Rwanda and how they focused on developing the human resource. But if you take our resources and let's say we focus on Ghana, what are the images we are seeing? I, myself, I'm so passionate about our narratives and the story we tell. I want to give an example where I was sitting down with my niece and we're watching a television show. And that day I was home, so I watched TV for quite a while. And there were a lot of cartoons that day. And all of the cartoons, obviously, were of princesses and blah, blah, blah. And then halfway, I realized that, oh my God, I've been sitting here for 5 hours or more with my niece, and everything we have seen has been a white person. Not to say there's anything wrong with being white, but has been a white person with flowing hair, being, you know, all the things that we know. And she is sitting there wanting to be a princess. And I'm thinking, it just struck me whilst this was going on, that my niece is going to grow up with a mindset that she's not good enough, nothing she does is good enough. And already by the time she's 10, we have lost the battle. And so for us, you know, even as we start this conversation, be it, are we going to cherish our environment? I just came for Rwanda and I was blown by the mindset that is there. I mean, you can drink from their gutters. It's amazing. So clean. When you enter the country, the first thing you see is we are a nation of doers. You know, if a plastic falls down, you pick it. All of these little things is about mindset, understanding ourselves. You know, even when we come to the female population, we talked about female being 50%. We drive the global hair industry, and none of the hairs are done here. I mean, that could be a creative space, and none of it is done here, but we drive the global industry on hair because it's also premised on our mindset, by the way. We grow up wanting to be princesses, but then we are told that our hair is not good enough. So we don't teach our young girls how to cherish their hair. The hair is cut, obviously, so by the time you're a young adult, you don't even know how to manage your hair. You're told that your hair is too coarse. So we are fighting so many battles on the surface when the real cause of the problem really is in the foundation and we need to go down. What are young men seeing? Again, going into the numbers, you'll be amazed that last year Ghana spent over $60 million downloading mobile games. Ghana is the second largest mobile game country on the continent. South Africa is the first. 40% of the South African population are gamers. We are talking about an industry that is hitting over 300 billion. None of these games that were downloaded were made by African developers. None of these games that were downloaded in Ghana was made by a Ghanaian developer. Again, what are the stories that are being perpetuated in these games? Every day we hear about violence in other parts of the world, in the US. Data has proven that many of these violence and behavioral issues that countries face are from video games. Some of them are from video games. And so again, we are importing cultures that we are not partaking in. We are not creating industries based on those products that we are consuming. And then again, our young people are going to grow up with a mindset that may not be very friendly to our environment. And I'll link that directly to perhaps our educational system. I feel that that also has to be revamped. People, all of us here, give it a couple of years and we'll all become stories. Who is telling our stories? Who is capturing our stories? What history are we telling to our people? In the US right now, they are even changing history through film. If you go to the classroom, some of the history that they don't find is palatable. They are changing it in the textbooks. Are we being intentional as well? In the US, there's something they call the hidden curriculum. And so when you see the American who believes that they can do anything, that's been hidden in their curriculum. But most importantly, even in their films. And so those days, again, you know, if I may play my age a little bit, when you saw Rambo or Chuck Norris or whatever, they will fight whatever war, fight. One person, he will beat everybody, and then at some point they will beat him, and then he's almost dying, and then he will pull out his American flag, dirty American flag, somehow wipe his face with it, and then where the energy comes from, nobody knows, he beats everybody. And so the American who is watching that is thinking, I can do everything. You know, I can do anything. And you will be amazed that many of the stories that come out of the US is intentional and strategic. Right now, if you look at our consumption of music and arts, I'm sure if you look at your own consumption of music, had it not been the rise of Afrobeats and all, about 80% of the music you consume probably is from America. The clothes we all wear, that's where it's from. The makeup we all wear, that's where it's from. The hair that we all put on, where is it from? So these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. If you would ask me, I'll say that our educational system, because of our unique scenario, should be more vocational and technical rather than trying to get a degree that puts you to work wherever it puts you to work. When we should be creating jobs, we come out of school expecting jobs because our educational system, again, may not be tailored to the specific needs of the continent and the specific needs of Ghana. I already spoke about unfriendly content programming. I think everybody can attest to that, and so I don't need to beat that horse too much. But basically, you become what you surround yourself with. For Africa's youth to create wealth, we need to also make our environment something that, you know, is wealthy, so to speak. When I went to Uganda, you know, when I went to Rwanda, there's this famous story that used to be in the US called the broken glass syndrome. The story happened in New York, and there was a time there was so much crime in, in New York. Most of the trains happen under, so you call it the subway. There was so much crime happening there, and then there was this particular mayor who came into power and decided that every night, after the crime had been committed, they would go in, because you had people painting on the walls, graffiti and all. They would go in, paint the walls, fix everything. Where there's a broken window, so it was called the broken window syndrome, fix the broken window and everything. And with time, data proved that with time, when people came and saw that the area was nice, it had been painted, they hesitated to make it dirty again. When the glass had been repaired, they hesitated to break it again. When I went to Rwanda, definitely I was very careful not to drop anything on the floor. And so if we are looking to create wealth, one of the things that worries me about Ghana, you don't have very beautiful spaces. You don't even have parks. You don't have anywhere you can go and sit. And so if we are looking to create wealth in our nation, we also need to start looking at some of the soft things, because, you know, you become who and what you surround yourself with. And so if a young person is looking to create wealth, are they surrounded, you know, with time, our culture is changing. More and more people are able and happy to display what they have, you know, provided they achieved it in the right way. But young people need to see more and more of that they can do. That then will encourage the can-do spirit. So again, I already said that the creative space is not really just about creating jobs. It's about mindset change and the control and flow of the creative human spirit. We have so many stories to tell. When I mentioned my name, I met, my middle name, I'm named after one of the most famous persons in Ghana, Asante. And I'm so proud of that because we also share a birthday and a death day. So, she was born and died. She was born and she died on the same day. That story hasn't been told. Akonfanoche hasn't been told. Our coming to the continent hasn't been told. Our slave stories haven't been told. There's so many stories that we have to tell the world that can change our narrative and put us out there and create the kind of prosperity that we need. One thing is for certain, as we look to the future, be it animation, and when I talk about film, I talk about animation, I talk about gaming, I talk about everything under the creative space. These are the fastest growing spaces. These are where the opportunities are, and I want to use the opportunity to encourage investors to look into investing in these spaces. I already talked about the scenario of gaming and how you don't have local investors investing in those spaces, and so you have a local player. For instance, if you see the character, the character with the girl holding the gun, she's called Efia or something like that. This is a character on Riot's game. Riot's game is one of the biggest game developers in the world. And this character has sold Ghana so much, we are not even aware of it as a country. And this character was designed and consulted for by a Ghanaian company. And yet we have that company trying to raise just about $1 million to expand and upskill their services. This particular company is called Letty Arts, and they are not able to tap into that. And so until we have local investment looking into this sector, I know that most of the times when we talk, the argument that comes out is that the creative players don't know how to speak the financial language. But I think all of those things are changing. The return on investment is clearer, but even then, opportunities to invest in the space is so large. If you look at the market, for instance, I just want to narrow down on the cinema space, because without cinema, which is the market, and other forms of markets, we are not going anywhere. The entire continent of Africa has less than 1,000 cinemas and less than 1,700 screens. To give you perspective, France has 6,000 screens, and the entire continent of Africa has less than 1,700 screens. This is an area for investment. Ijaro, maybe beyond agric, maybe you would consider expanding into this space, because the return on investment can be really large. If you look at some of the terrain and what is happening this year, Korea, Netflix, for instance, announced a $2 billion investment into K-dramas. That is big. There was a report that came out from Netflix about their contribution to Africa. Really, really, impactful, but not enough compared to the rest of the world. I was telling a friend yesterday, due to my obsession with K-drama, I now want to go to Korea. I want to drink soju. I can speak a few languages, a few words of their language just by watching South Korean dramas. And so even when we talk about tourism, when Prof was talking, he mentioned tourism. Even when we talk about tourism, there's a phenomenon known as film tourism. And data proves that when people see a country, when people see a locale, they want to visit. And in fact, if any of you here remember Braveheart, when Braveheart came, it was shot in Scotland. And, tourism rose by over 500% in just about 6 months and stayed that way for over 5 years. Game of Thrones is a much newer example. When Game of Thrones came out, there are some cities that basically closed up, not wanting tourists to come anymore because they were packed. So even if you look into tourism, one of the best ways that we can push our tourism is by selling Ghana, demonstrating Ghana as a place where people can visit. And again, that we can do through film. So basically, I think I just want to wrap up by saying that, you know, it's a no-brainer that we need to focus on the creative sector, not because we are here asking for your attention or begging for your attention, but because Africa and Ghana has no choice. The creative space is the largest employer. We have hands that we have to employ. The creative space impacts the mind, it impacts the story, it impacts culture, it's the vehicle of culture, it is a diplomatic tool. Whichever way you look at the creative space is a space to focus on, and I want to congratulate ISHMAEL YAMSON and Associates for including, first of all, recognizing, understanding the impact of the space, and especially moving forward, the contribution of the space and how critical it is to the conversation and including us in this conversation. Thank you.